The NFL has a serious problem going on right now, and I'm not referring to political strife or ratings decreases or anything like that, but rather the incredibly one-sided battle going on between offensive and defensive lines around the league. As somewhat gimmicky offenses have become more and more common among collegiate and high school programs over the last decade, young offensive linemen are now further and further separated from proper coaching and technique. In mine and many others' opinions, that lack of an early development has led to a disturbing shortage of really good pass protectors at the professional level. One team, however, has found a way to possibly reverse that trend, and that's the Green Bay Packers. Offensive line coach James Campen이 has spent his last 11 seasons perfecting a better style of pass protection that's been made possible by modern rule changes and referee tendencies, and of course I'll have more on what that technique actually is in a few minutes, but the results have inspired coaches across the NFL to completely revamp their teachings. Keep in mind that many of these teams are also changing their blocking styles to accommodate modern, aggressive quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers, who is notorious for holding the ball forever and taking a lot of sacks that, honestly, he probably shouldn't have. On the flip side of this offensive line revolution, you have your modern pass rusher, athletic, tenacious, and usually very well schooled on how to defeat traditional offensive line techniques. The 2017 poster child for all pass rushers, at least after a handful of weeks, is Cowboys defensive end DeMarcus Lawrence. Already a frontrunner for the Defensive Player of the Year trophy despite playing on a relatively below-average defense, Lawrence is on pace for an absolutely insane 27 sacks this season. He's already got 8.5 sacks in just 5 games, which would be good numbers for a full season for most edge rushers. But with how consistent his production has been so far in 2017, it's not far-fetched to think he could keep this up all year long. That being said, when the dominant Lawrence found himself facing Packers right tackle Brian Bulaga and James Campen's pass protection techniques last week, he finally seemed to meet his match. Yes, he still did get a sack in this game just from pure effort while Rodgers was running around trying to find somebody to throw to, which is pretty typical Rodgers, but his actual wins against Bulaga off the ball were very few and very far between. Now, before we look closer at this matchup, and specifically Bulaga's technique in detail, I want to show what Lawrence brings to the table as an edge rusher and set the stage for how he's been so productive. Let's start back in Week 3 against the Cardinals. This was easily Lawrence's best game. He had 3 sacks on the day and a whole bunch of other pressures to go with him, and all 3 of these sacks were really excellent. His best one of the game, though, was a 4th sack that ended up not even counting due to penalty, but it was a beauty. Second quarter, about a minute left in the half, and he's one-on-one against Jared Veldheer out on the edge. No chips, no doubles, just my guy against your guy, and let's see who wins. And this is where he's most dangerous because he's got such good hands and power and natural leverage that he can give pretty much any right tackle in the league a lot of problems if he's left one-on-one. Off the snap, Lawrence gets a decent jump. It's not elite or anything, but it's an okay jump. Veldheer is getting good depth in his kick slide as well, and he's actually got Lawrence beat with his angle on the corner. As long as his hands and leverage are good, Veldheer's in a really good position here to choke off Lawrence's angle and keep him from flattening around that edge. However, look at Lawrence's hands here. Before Veldheer throws his first punch, Lawrence has his hands up and he's ready to throw a down club to neutralize that punch before it even lands. As Veldheer tries to get into his chest, Lawrence clubs down on his wrist and clears him away, and now all of a sudden Veldheer goes from being in a good position to being off balance and struggling to recover. He's leaning forward, his momentum is carrying him behind the pocket rather than being able to reset and re-anchor. This is a really bad spot that he's in here, all because that straightforward punch got neutralized. He desperately needed to land that shot into Lawrence's chest so that he could choke off that angle around the edge, but he just couldn't do it. And now look at what Lawrence does after that. He stays low and keeps his pad level under Veldheer while getting his right hand into his ribcage, and from there he just goes to work with power and drives through the pocket while getting back inside to sack Palmer. Once that early punch was missed, it was over and Palmer was a dead man walking. Beautiful, beautiful technique from Lawrence on this speed to power move. There was another sack from this game late in the 4th quarter that I absolutely loved as well. Again, he's one-on-one with Veldheer, and again, he just kicks his ass with raw power. But watch how he augments that power with technique. On contact, he catches and controls Veldheer's low hand, which was again coming in with another straight punch to the chest. Lawrence is holding that hand away from his chest so that Veldheer has no way to grab on and fight back, and at the same time he's maintaining a low pad level for leverage and bull rushing his way right through the pocket with a one-arm stab. There is absolutely nothing that Veldheer could do to stop him. Lawrence made him completely powerless. He got inside his chest, he got lower leverage, and he took away Veldheer's only method of recovery by controlling that low hand. Once again, this is about as pretty a one-arm bull rush as you're ever going to see. This right here should be teaching tape for every young defensive end. So, seeing how dangerous Lawrence is and how quickly he can overwhelm tackles with strength and hand placement, that sets up the next question. What happened 2 weeks later when Lawrence went against a tackle with even better technique than he does in Bryan Bulaga? Well, nothing. And by nothing, I mean that Lawrence could not really do anything for most of the game. Bulaga's new school technique kept him almost completely in check. Take a look at how it works. Some call it the hands outside technique, some call it the hug technique, some defensive coaches just straight up call it holding. Personally, I prefer calling it the hug technique because that's basically what it is. Instead of punching straight and inside to the chest, the hug technique has blockers swing their hands wide like a hug and up into the shoulder pads of the defender, just like Bulaga is doing here. Grabbing onto the pads allows you to control all lateral movement from the rusher so they can't go around you. They can't swim, they can't rip, they can't spin, they can't do anything effectively but go in one single direction, and that's straightforward. Now, the weakness for this, obviously, is that you are vulnerable initially to power rushers because you're essentially conceding your chest. You're letting the defensive lineman get low and in your ribcage, which for old school offensive line coaches is basically a nightmare scenario because usually if a rusher gets into your chest, you'll just get bull rushed straight to the quarterback. And to a degree, that's still true. Using the hug technique, you will inevitably give up some ground early. However, there are ways to mitigate that damage with proper fundamentals. Case in point, Bulaga on this play. He's keeping his base wide so that he stays balanced, he's walking his feet backwards to continually re-anchor himself, and most importantly, while he's digging his feet in, he's lifting up on Lawrence's shoulder pads to limit his leverage advantage as much as possible. Eventually, all of that slows him down and Lawrence's push is absorbed, but here's the kicker and why this technique is so good. Even if Lawrence wanted to throw a counter move in the middle of that bull rush while Bulaga was trying to re-anchor, like an arm over or a spin or a rip, anything of that nature, he would not be able to. Bulaga has him by the shoulder pads and he's got leverage with a wide base, so there is no way for Lawrence to counter laterally in either direction. He physically cannot move and get away anymore once he's committed, so once he's locked in and that bull rush starts to stall out, it's over. The rush is done. For comparison's sake, on the other side, Lane Taylor is a perfect example of what happens when you fail to execute this technique. Taylor misses and cannot get his hands outside of Tyrone Crawford's shoulder pads. His punch is inside and it gets immediately swatted away and he gives up the sack. This is why they teach the hug technique in Green Bay, because it doesn't let pass rushers just knock away your hands inside and get easy wins. They have to earn every inch of ground by going through the blocker, not around them. Now, going back to Bulaga, this is a different snap, also in the second quarter, against backup defensive end Demontre Moore. Once he anchors down here, yes, it is borderline holding because he is technically holding Moore in place, but the refs are never going to call this while both of them are facing each other. They would only call a hold if Moore was able to fight away from Bulaga's frame and get to one side or the other while having his pads or jersey tugged on. But that's easier said than done because Bulaga's holding him there in the first place. If they're not going to call a hold until you get away from him, but you can't get away from him because of the hold, then no hold is ever going to be called. That catch-22 is how the Packers get away with it, and that's the beauty of this technique, or rather the annoyance with it if you're a defensive player. If you're a strong enough blocker to not get beaten on that initial push, then you just won't be beaten at all. Let's look at this in a familiar scenario like what we saw from Jared Veldheer earlier and from Texans tackle Kendall Lamb here. Another reason why you teach the hug technique is that it helps you against the speed rush and against the dip and rip combo. If you're just trying to land a traditional straight punch inside while kick sliding, like Lamb is trying to do on Jaguars defensive end Yannick Ngakoue, a lot of tackles subconsciously stop moving their feet because they're trying so hard to put all of their strength and momentum forward into that defender's chest. They forget that they still need to get depth as well. If you actually land the punch with all that power behind it, that's fine, you probably won the rep anyway. But if you stop moving your feet to hit that punch and you miss it, you just gave up a sack guaranteed because you have no depth in your kick slide and you're completely out of position to recover. The broadcast angle of this sack shows it even better, with Lamb slowing down his feet and lunging forward to put all of his power into that punch on Ngakoue, only for Ngakoue to sidestep it and get by him easily for the strip sack. I think the best way to put it is this: if you sell out to land one punch and miss, your quarterback is screwed. It's a guaranteed sack. But if you play the speed rush conservatively with the hug technique, then you don't have to force yourself into that all or nothing style of pass protection, and it gives your tackles a bit more margin for error. Using Bryan Bulaga again as an example, if you simply try to catch the defensive end with that hug technique rather than attempting to punch him, it takes away your instinct to lunge because you're not trying to knock them on their ass. You're inviting them in and then you anchor once you've got them trapped. That conservativeness helps tackles keep their feet moving to get depth, and it protects them from themselves punching too early out of panic and getting beaten by pass rushers with quicker hands. For example, on this snap, Balaga pulls his hands back as Lawrence brings his hands up for that same little downward club that beat Valdir earlier. He knows the club is coming, so he pulls those hands out of the way so that Lawrence has no target to neutralize. Balaga's waiting for Lawrence to make the first move, and then he goes in to grab him. His feet are moving the whole time in his kick slide, and he catches Lawrence right in the chest as he goes by. Notice how he's not trying to choke off the angle. He's letting Lawrence have it so that he can just redirect him harmlessly around the back of the pocket. This technique makes a speed rush or a dip and rip almost useless because no matter how hard Lawrence tries, he will never be able to flatten down his angle enough to get to Rodgers from this position. The only way to really beat this kind of pass protection with a speed rush is by forcing the quarterback up into the interior penetration where they can clean up. And luckily for Lawrence, that's exactly what happened here. He got some help from the inside rush and they got the job done for him. But individually, in a vacuum, Balaga never gave Lawrence a shot here, not even close. Over and over and over throughout this game, whether it was Lawrence or another rusher like Demontre Moore, no matter who it was, Balaga was able to use the hug technique to gain control of their lateral movement. And once he was able to anchor down against their power, it was all over. And for the record, no Packers offensive lineman was called for a single hold all day long. The hug technique has been extraordinarily effective for the Green Bay line, and that's why I always consider their games against the Vikings front seven to be must-see TV. Of course, these two teams are conveniently playing in Minneapolis this weekend, so there was really no better time than now to produce this exact video. Minnesota, under the tutelage of Mike Zimmer, is one of the few defenses that has figured out how to routinely beat up on Aaron Rodgers. They see this technique twice a year, every year, and after all these snaps against one another, they know exactly what to expect and how to beat it. They have double A-gap blitz looks at all times to confuse protections. They take advantage of wide hand placement by using speed to power moves to cave in the pocket. They have experienced vets like Brian Robinson that already know not to fall for the trap of making the first move, so he literally stops in the middle of his rush to bait out Balaga's hands, and then he attacks. The Vikings have taken this test against the Packers' offensive line so many times that they already know all the answers. They come with a plan on every snap, and every move they make is deliberately to defeat the hug technique. They rush smarter, not harder. All that being said though, whether or not the Vikings have the Packers figured out, to me what's going on in Green Bay is still remarkable. Just think about it, they've found a way to, in essence, legalize offensive holding. They've turned the rulebook on its head and used technique to take referees completely out of the equation. Defenders are going to complain and plead over and over again for flags to be thrown, but at the end of the day, this is their new reality and they're going to have to get used to it. And judging by how many teams are taking notice and incorporating the hug technique into their own teachings now, what was once the exception may just be the new rule. So here's a message to all the defensive line coaches out there. When you're facing the Packers, don't panic, don't get frustrated, and don't complain. You're never going to get the penalty calls anyway. Just take a page out of the Vikings playbook and rush smarter, not harder.